Hello, I'm Nathaniel, your 3D CG guru, and I think there's supposed to be a speedrun part 3 video somewhere dropping. I don't know where that is, but I did find a video on run cycles, so that's what we'll be looking at in this video. And I just want to mention that in this video series, I've collected a number of images that people can use as reference, and I use in the video series. So I'm going to just kind of go over those in real quick fashion before we get into the video series. So if you look into the link down below, you should be able to download this zip file yourself and dive through the content how you wish. But essentially, I have a breakdown of kind of what I think are some key poses between walks, jogs, and runs. When I go and look online, you have a lot of kind of general broad information, but a lot of the poses that I see are pretty cartoony looking, or they'll maybe give you frame numbers, but they don't actually give you the percents of when those poses should take place. So I kind of did my own kind of breakdown. And the way this is set up currently is that we have, if I can get this to be the entire view there we go. We have essentially the start pose here. And then you're going to notice in these images, I have two different percents. Essentially, I took a walk, jog, run, and sprint, and I put them all on the timeline together and I scaled these out, and this is all motion capture. Now, the one caveat being that the sprint animation is from a game production, and it was heavily modified a lot. So you can't necessarily count so much on what that motion capture looks like for the sprint, but I did include it because I think there's still some interesting similarities to look at between that and, let's say, the run cycle or jog cycle. In those percentages, this is essentially two different numbers. So we have the 18.75%. That would be if we were talking about the entire duration of the animation. So this is a 32 frame animation. So we just multiply 18 by that, and that would give us our percentage. But for the cycles, generally, we are really more interested in the halfway points. So I've gone in and just kind of put those, essentially double those percentages to let everyone know where that would be if we're talking about just half the animation cycle. So we have these points of reference that you can use to kind of get a sense of what the poses are. And I start with essentially the passing pose because that's going to be one pose that's common amongst all the motions, where with the walk cycle, a walk cycle is really different than the jog, run, and sprint because feet are always making contact with the ground, where with the other animations, there's going to be some period of time in which there's not going to have any contact being made with the ground as you're going through those locomotion cycles. So I have the LP for kind of left passing and right passing. And then we hit these key moments where essentially the foot is about to go off of the ground. So that's left up. It's also an extreme kind of pose in the sense that the arm, in this case, the left arm is kind of completed swinging forward and is about to reverse direction. You'll notice in this particular one, the jog is not really mentioned because we haven't hit a critical pose for the jog yet. The jog spends more time on the ground or having contact with the ground than, let's say, a run. And yeah, so we can go down there and you can just kind of look at those however you wish. And I have those broken down into just individual speeds so you don't have to be distracted by everything if you just want to compare like the run, the walk, or the jog. I also have a GIF here that plays, and this is just really looking at those same percentages, but from the front view so that you can kind of see what's happening with the upper body and lower body as we're animating our cycle. And again, this is only half of the cycle, so you'll notice the character shifts over to screen left, but then the GIF ends. And then I have those as still images as well, so you can really stop and digest the information however you see fit. And then finally, I have kind of a breakdown of what are the trajectory or the shapes that are going to be made by the body for these different animations. Now, I do want to mention here, I think with this walk cycle, I'm assuming I probably didn't have my trajectory cycles enabled. So the shape there is a little different than I would expect, but it gives some percentages here. So for the walk and the jog, for example, we're going to start on the left leg and we're going to shift over to the right leg 50% of the way through the animation. And then we're going to come back at the end of the cycle. The difference being with the walk, we lower our body as we're going from one leg to the other, where with the jog, we're kind of launching off the ground to get that air time. So we're going in an upward motion. And these are just some interesting shapes to see. The run is kind of the opposite of both of those, where we're going to start more in the middle of our cycle. So at the 0%, 50%, and 100% points, we're going to be more centered. And then we switch over to the left or the right side as we're midway through. So you can use all those as a reference. I gave these kind of arrows to kind of just show what the motion is of these different patterns here for the jog and the walk. So take that, do with it as you would like. Other than that, I think we can get right into the video series. I will mention that before we even get into the run itself, I do give a kind of refresher or review of the ways we can copy and paste keys, because we're going to be using a couple of the relative paste options later in the series, and I want to make sure everyone understands the subtle differences between those different modes and options. So once we review copying and pasting some keys, then we'll get into the actual run cycle. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at all of the different ways we can copy and paste keys inside of the timeline. Now, to start with, the first thing I've done before we even get into anything is I've set up this simple scene. So I have my character here, and then I copied that character's pose in a future frame, and then just grab this controller in world space and move the character back like so. In this additional pose, the second pose, I also took the hand and I just lifted it up some so it's a little bit higher in the air, and then I also rotated the wrist like so. This scene is just going to be used to kind of discuss some of the concepts of how copying works, and then hopefully as we go into the video series some more for this week's assignment, you'll see how we might apply some of that information. The other thing I did was, if we go and we look at these points for our character and we go to the object properties, to the right, you're going to see this little eyeball here, and that eyeball allows me to see what layer track a point is on. Really, the eyeball shows you every behavior that is added to a given object. When this is off, you'll see the list is a lot smaller because there's a lot of data in there they don't really expect people to want to modify. But turning that eyeball on essentially means show me everything, all information, all behaviors. And one of those is the additional info, which has the track information associated with it. And what's interesting about the way they have this foot set up right now is that essentially the toe area of the model is considered part of the foot track, but the heel in this case originally was not. So if we go and we look at this left foot, they assign it to the left leg track. And that's not really what I want. It causes some weird things to happen when I try to copy just the actual foot track around. So I want to reassign this point here. So I'm going to select that point, and then I'm going to click on my track, and then I'll just hit F9, and then it's now assigned to our new track. So that's the setup before we start exploring anything. So the first thing we need to discuss before we even get into the copy paste command is what is happening when I shift, middle click, and drag a key from one location to another. We can see here that in this case, when I did this, my foot key or leg key that I copied attempted to go back to where it existed in world space on the previous frame. So Shift A to go back and forth, and Shift D, right? And that's because this key here was actually set to be an IK key, meaning all of these points are going to try to achieve their same location relative to the world grid. So when I move my character back and then I copy my IK key, it just moves these points back to where they were relative to the world. We can have keys actually be FK keys. So if I set this as an FK key and I go in here and I drag and drop this, we really shouldn't see any difference because nothing has changed. Now, I could grab the foot here and pull this up like so. And now if let's go to this frame. If I middle click and drag and release, you'll see that it dropped all the way down. And the reason for that too is because this ankle here is part of the leg, and I'm dragging and dropping the whole leg key. So what I want to do instead is I want to try this again. I'm going to grab this and move it up, and I'm just going to take the FK key for just the foot and middle click and drag it. And now we get how this foot was oriented in relation to the shin bone. So if we look here, we have this angle, and then if we go over here, we have this angle. So when we have FK keys, it's really almost the same as just saying, hey, let's get the rotation data for this bone and just paste it into the new location. Even if the shin is maybe rotated out in space, I should just do that with my points here. the orientation of this child bone didn't move. Now, things do get interesting here because inside of Cascadeur, we can also move things around or paste data, copy and paste data in relation to other objects. And we can do that in global and local space. So if we think about the term global, you can think of that as maybe being the same as IK. It's where is this in relation to the world? It's not taking into consideration any orientation information. It's just positionally. And then local is going to really take into consideration the orientation of an object when I'm pasting something. So what if I wanted my foot to, if we look from the right here, I wanted my foot to be flat like it is on my first frame, but I wanted it to be flat up here. What I could do is I could grab these keys and then I'm going to go ahead and just copy these. But when I copy them, I'm going to either go up here to this little hotkey here and say relative pivot mode, or I'm going to go over to the settings here and turn on relative. So initially what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the global positions of all these points relative to this ankle, because that's where the pivot point is placed. And now when I go up here and I Control V to paste, it flattens out. So relative to this point, the offsets of these other points cause that foot to be flat. So that is global relative. Relative to this point in the world, globally, plot these positions here. Now, when you copy something, it copies both the global and local information. So when you paste, you can actually, I believe, let's see here. Oh yeah, the local in this case is, we'll skip that for a second. Really, the copy copies both global and local information, and it's at the time of paste where the differences take effect. Now, it is a little hard to see this ankle in local space. I really need to go up here and select this higher up object and copy with that pivot point selected. So then when I go in here and I paste like this and I get that original angle. So in the case of the ankle here, that's almost the same as just doing the FK key copy. But things get more interesting. Let's say I want to go ahead and I want to copy the position of this foot relative to this right wrist here. So I'll just right click on that. And so now I'm going to store all of these positions as offsets to this point in space. So I'm going to go ahead and copy, and then I'm going to go up here. And in this frame, the hand actually lifted up. So then when I paste, I actually lift my foot up. So the distance from the wrist to the ankle and all the toe bones, it is the same. Now, because I did that paste in global relative, it didn't take into consideration that my wrist has actually reoriented between the first frame and the last frame. So if I switch this over to local, it's going to take the orientation into consideration, and it's going to swing that foot around because my wrist in the previous pose was here, and now it's swung around up here. So really interesting stuff. And when we're doing all this copying and pasting, you can really almost get anything you need out of this. Even to the point of if you're copying a subsection of an animation, which we'll be doing here in a moment, you can actually go into the edit menu and you can say copy an interval. And depending on what these settings are here, you're going to copy different information. And then we can paste the interval, so we can paste a range of animation into something else. You'll see there's also just copying a pose, and then maybe I want to take that single pose and paste it into a series of frames. That's the paste in the interval. So it's taking a single frame and just duplicating it across multiple frames. And then we can copy kind of an entire timeline, and then also tracks if we wanted. But the timeline interval, I believe, I haven't really used that one yet, but I think that would be transferring between scenes. So if I have an animation in this scene and I want to add it into this scene, I could copy the timeline and paste it between the two different scenes. All right. So before we move on to the main part of the assignment, let's just take a quick example here. Again, for this particular animation that I have, I animated this object here kind of independent of the hand. Even though it's technically a child of the hand, I went into the into some of the settings here. Let me see which one it is. And I essentially said that I want to move this independent of the hand. So that means that for the left hand, which this is technically supposed to be a child of, it's the hand is kind of drifting around. So here's an example where my hand is not aligned to this weapon anymore. So I could go in here on the very first frame and I could select these points, and let me just turn off trajectories. This is my hand. So I'll just double click that. And then I'm going to go ahead and, well, in this case, when I double click, it's also selecting the weapon, which is not what I want. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to marquee select these 3 points. And then I'm just going to click here to this pivot point for our weapon. And I'm going to, in this case, I want it to be the orientation as well as the position of the sword. So I'm going to local relative copy this. And now I could find a frame where the hand is maybe not aligning, like here. And then I could actually go in and paste this like so. Right now, actually, I think on this particular scene, the animation is actually pasted properly, but it's the interpolation that's causing the shift. So here, I could go in there and paste that like so. Or if I wanted to, I could grab all these. Let's just do this paste into interval. And now we should have that staying locked into that entire frame range. We need to make our first pose, and we actually have a couple different choices as to how we want to approach animating this. We could do it in a very kind of methodical method where we just get the core going, get the legs going, and we treat it really as these fragmented parts of the character. Or we could attempt to go in and pose everything at once. I find, the one way, just doing one kind of section at a time, feels maybe a little disjointed. And at the same time, if I just do a bunch of poses right out of the gate, of essentially going in and making all these poses without any type of kind of methodic approach to how I create the poses in the first place and kind of break down limbs and stuff as kind of subsections, that those animations feel a little wobbly and a little wonky. The things with these runs is that if you have a really rigid core body, the animation just feels stiff. But when you go to then try to add some subtlety to it, it's really easy to get yourself in a position where it feels like this kind of cartoony, wonky runs. So the motion, the subtleties of the shifts and things had to be really kind of minute in order to get something that feels believable, that's not stiff. So we're going to try to kind of mix the two together. I'm going to really try to get the initial core of the body posed out here and not really do the arms at the full extreme angles. And then we'll kind of do a pass at the arms here. So to start with, I'm not going to use the auto posing tool for much of this, but for this initial pose, we might as well. And I'm going to really do this in orthographic view from the front view as well as from the side view here. And this is going to work out well for us, I think. So let's go in here and just turn on the auto posing. The first thing I'm just going to do is I want to just get these legs closer to the center line here of the feet. They don't need to be so spread so far out. And I'm going to kind of reorient these to point towards the front. And then I'll move this leg in here like this. So try to get that kind of on the center line. And we're trying to capture this initial first pose here. So if we look at this, so we're trying to capture this initial first pose. And if we go in here and look at this, this is what we're looking for. Notice the left foot, use that center of mass as kind of a reference point here, is under that plant. And then we also have the kind of bent knee and this arm back. I'm not going to do a tilt on the body yet, and I'm not going to do much with the arms other than the upper arm. So let's jump back over to Cascadeur. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this foot and we'll pull that back, and I'll rotate it here like so. And then of course right away the auto posing is kind of getting in the way of things for what I want to do. I'm going to do a lot of these motions on the actual world translation here. Okay, I don't like the orientation of that body, so I'm going to just move that forward to be a little more side profile here. And these arms, I think I want to kind of tilt back so they're tight, a little tighter to the body. And then let's get the head looking just straight ahead. Obviously, maybe we could tilt the head up a little bit if we wanted. So this is going to be our rough initial pose. And let's just kind of compare that to the reference. One thing I think I want to do right out of the gate is I also want to get the body a little more compressed. The knee's pretty bent, and this is supposed to be, we're supposed to be compressing down at this point. So we want to give ourselves some range to be able to bounce up. If we don't really drop that and get a nice compression, then it's going to be harder to get that kind of height we want and making it feel right. That's about as far as I'm actually going to take the auto pose for any of this. One thing I want to do too, I think for the sake of seeing the swing and the tempo of the swing, is I'm going to initially rotate these arms out so that they are straight. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure if we look from the top-down view that the arm is kind of swinging out on this motion where as it goes back, it's a little further out, and as they swing in, it's kind of compressing towards the chest. We don't want something like this where the arm is just straight back and forward. We want this diagonal type motion to the swing. And I think that looks pretty good. So this is our first pose. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. Remember, hit S to just quickly hide those controllers. Is that I might take this knee action and just tilt it in a little bit like that. There we go. For our animation, we only have to make 3 actual poses to really get the sense of everything. And then when we refine, we can add in some extra little keys to make sure the feet are planning correctly. But this is essentially the 0, 50%, and 100%. And for this animation, I'm going to be working in 30 frames a second, and I'm going to say this is a 20 frame run cycle. So now I just need to go in here and just copy this pose to frame 10 and frame 20. Now for my pose here at frame 10, I want the opposite. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to select all the points. I'll say mirror tool, and I'm going to mirror on the X plane, and I'm going to mirror just the current frame. So there we flip that. So now if we hit play, this is our animation of our run. Now we need to go in there and we need to add the next pose. And so the next pose is close to 40% for the halfway mark. And so we're going to do this and pose right here. Our character does actually have a tilt at this point. I was going to say, if we were just posing this initially, I would add a tilt to this character. And if you wanted to refine that tilt, just remember, if you wanted to globally do that, I could essentially go in here and let's say grab all these points, and let's actually just hit 1 on the keyboard just to get the upper body. And I could do that tilt adjustment in the interval edit mode with just a constant refinement. And then I could say, like, I want him tilting more, and now he's tilting more, or I want the character not tilting as much. So maybe this is a more upright run. So you could make these refinements and it's just going to apply that offset to everything. But in my case, I think I like that tilt that I got from the auto posing tool. But just a little tip. And actually, another thing I think I want to do before we even get any further is I think I'm going to go ahead and fix these fingers. So I'm going to go over to box controller mode and marquee select to see these controllers. I'll go into local space, and I just want to turn on the tail action so I can just curl the fingers all at once. And there we go. If I double click on that base controller, it's going to grab all the children, so I can just kind of curl. And I wish there was a way, and maybe there is, I'll have to look into it, a way to see these controllers to draw on top of the mesh versus inside, because really kind of hard to see things here. So let's go in here and just make a refinement to our wrist positions, turn the tail mode off here. I should really look at the hotkey for that. So let's say we have this hand. I'll double click on this controller. I'm going to say mirror, and I'm going to say on current frame. Now just get the hand looking similar. Now I did that on frame 20, so I made a refinement. So I need to go back and clone that to frame 0, and I need to also go back and recreate a frame 10. So frame 10 now needs to have the animation mirrored. When you're using that mirror tool, it is actually best to kind of do it in the box mode versus controller mode or point controller mode, because then you're going to get all the hands and all the other secondary controllers that you may forget. I still tend to just use the point controller mode because I'm really ever actually in that next level of refinement. But here we go. There's our hands. And again, I'm not so concerned about the forearm at this point. So let's go over to frame 4. So 40% of the way on a 10 frame animation is before. So it's nice and clean, easy for us to find that frame. And we'll set a key. And then I'm going to go in here and just start to get our character lifting up here. So actually, before I do that, let's actually take a look at the frame we're trying to recreate, and we'll start with the feet. So this is the next frame in our animation here. So should be fairly easy. I'll just grab this. I'm pulling it back. And when I do this, I'm going to try to get, I notice this leg feels like it's an extension of the angle that the body is taking. So I'm just going to kind of try to match that, pull this up. We're going to have to rotate this down, and let's get our toes corrected like so. And I'm going to just zoom in there to really check that clip. And we'll say that that is the left leg. And then for our right leg, let's just swing it around here like so. And I can't grab that. There we go. So the foot is kind of at a 90 degree of the shin. And my leg is a little too high right now, just looking at the angle here. Now, I haven't lifted my character. This is actually going to cause some stuff. So let's hit 1 with nothing selected, and then just let's lift this character up to kind of straighten that out. Okay, now for the arms, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this, and in the animation, we've got this bent elbow. But like I said, I'm going to do the elbows in a moment, and you'll see why. But let's just go ahead and get to this swing, kind of looking, what I'm doing is I'm essentially just looking like, what is the angle of the body bend relative to straight up and down, and then what is this kind of relative to straight up and down. So maybe it's something like this. And I want to make sure I'm rotating just on the X so that I can swing in and out as I do the cycle. We'll do this, and then here, our other arm, it's a little obscured. I'm just going to rough it in, because what we're going to do in the long run is we're going to get the left arm and the left leg looking really good, and we're going to transfer the animations over to the other arm. So even if the other arm is not quite right at this point, we can make some refinements there. Now, if I look at this character right now, I feel like I really would want to take the arm and give it a little shoulder motion here. So we get this kind of twist, or you could say we want to really kind of grab this, right, and do a rotation. But that feels a little weird. I really just want to see the shoulder go back and forth. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to translate. But notice what happens here. As I translate, so I get a little shoulder action. Essentially, I want to see some back and forth like this with my shoulders. It does pull the core of the body, which we do not want. And it's a good habit, I think, to just almost like always lock these points down so that anything that we do at this point is really just a rotation effect on the shoulder versus a pull effect on the shoulder. So let's look at this pose here now that I've done that and see how things are looking. So the shoulder might be a little extreme. This is obviously something too we could kind of refine after the fact, but I did want to take into consideration the fact that the shoulder should be extending the range of motion of these limbs. So we're going to do something like that. And again, for my right arm, it really doesn't matter because I'm going to be copying my animations over, and whatever I do here is going to change, but I still just struggle to like check my poses if I don't have this here. Okay. We're going to say that this is good. Let's check this foot with that center of gravity here, or the center of mass. And it's, maybe this foot could go a little further back, but it's kind of right. The animation definitely does feel weird when we don't have those arms bent. And I'm going to just give a little bit more bend to the knee, just a pinch. Okay, so that's pose at 40%. And again, we could go in there and we could just take this exact pose. And I don't know if the fixed points there would mess anything up. So I hit R to unlock those shoulder points before I do my mirror operation. I bet you it would still mirror even with those things locked, but I don't want to mess anything up. Okay, so we have going up and then down and then up and then down. Let's go ahead and then get frame 70 in there. So 70, I'm going to turn on my ghost so we can see our character here. And I want to just see keyframes only. So I'm going to go into this and just say keys only. And I'm going to set a new key here. So for the extreme, the knee does start to come down a little bit. So I could do something like this where I have my foot and I keep that knee in the same position. Let's do this a little bit different. Let's double click on the knee to cause this swing. So I could just swing right out of here. But the knee actually does dip a little bit at this point. So I do want to kind of pull this down like closer to this. And then let's look from the front to see what this foot is doing. And let's look at the reference. It's got a little bit of a tilt up like so. These are the things we're going to do some broad strokes, but when you really start to do subtle tweaks and refinements, having things like the foot tilted off at a slight angle, I think helps things look not so mechanic. It makes everything look a little more believable. So we've got that. And then I'm going to have this foot here coming around like so. And then we're going to do this. And really the idea is between 40 and 70, we're kind of like hitting the peak of the height of our jump. And I think as we turn on the interpolation, we'll get a little bit of natural kind of overshoot, which is nice. So we can kind of keep our character at the same pose at this point. And then our arm at this point, again, for now, I'm just ignoring the forearm and I'm saying this arm is kind of like straight down. This other arm doesn't really look like it's changed much. So maybe it started to come back the other way, but it doesn't look like it's changed a lot. So we'll do something like that. Now, I do feel like there's something weird going on with the torso here. We haven't really actually added in the left to right yet, or, kind of done anything in here. Some of this refinement with the actual shapes and the expansion and contraction of the torso we'll do at a later stage. Just trying to block in the rough stuff here. And we're definitely going to get to those forearms here in a moment. Okay, so this is frame 7, and it's also going to be frame 17. Let's go in here and mirror that. All right, so now this is our animation. And we can start to kind of gauge, even at this stage, how is this animation feeling? Does the bounce feel kind of right? Do the arms look like they're rotating too much or not enough? We can refine those things. So with these poses in place, we're going to go ahead and start to, we'll enable the interpolation and start to make some refinements so we can get a better sense of what this motion looks like. And then we're going to get these forearms fixed up. Okay, so I'm going to take my entire animation here and I am going to hit Alt-B to just turn on interpolation, and we're going to hit go. And so this is our animation. Notice there is a hitch, and I'm assuming that's just because we have the same frame playing twice. And Cascadeur doesn't know that this is supposed to be a cycle. So the end of the animation, the interpolation is just not going to feel right. So let's go ahead and fix this up. I'm going to select the first frame to everything but the second to last frame, and I'll hit the cycle button. And when I do that, now things should be playing smoother. There is still a hitch here. So that means, to me, I feel like it's probably something with the poses of the forearm here. Let's see. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go in and just kind of look at the trajectory of this animation at this point to kind of see what's happening, and I'll lock this. Yeah, so what's interesting, if we look at this, we actually have these two keys. It doesn't feel like it's really cycling cleanly. So let me go in here and actually, the other thing I want to do here, which might make a difference for us, is for the interpolation of the arms, we don't want this to be IK interpolation. We're going to do a global rotation. There we go. Okay. Now, I could also do an FK rotation. You know, you could see which of those feels better, but I really like the way the global rotation does things in relation to the arm, so that's what I'm going to use. Okay, I think that was the main issue there. So let's just verify this. I'll, turn off the trajectory, and now we should get something that looks smoother. Yeah. Now there is a weird kind of odd motion to the forearm happening here still, so we're going to have to fix that up. And then also, if we look from the front view, our upper body feels a little strange. So let's go ahead and get the forearm working here. So what I want to do at this point is I'm going to select this key. I'm going to grab all of these keys actually. And I'm going to just rotate this forearm up so it's at this kind of 90 degree. Because if we look at the reference footage for this first half of the cycle, it really is kind of this like almost like 90 degree bend. And because I'm making this as a offset I want to apply to everything, I'm going to go ahead and enable the constant fixed interval mode. And I also want to enable this fixed pivot mode. I want these rotations to happen relative to where they are on each frame. So we'll just go in here and do this. So now when I do this, you'll see we get red keys here, and that's because I had the auto, we make fixed keys on the rotation, which I don't want, so I'm going to turn off the auto fixed interpolation. And so let's just rotate this, and I'll hit S so my controllers aren't in my way as I'm like gauging the rotation here. Okay. So we have this, and now we can kind of start to see a little bit of the wonkiness happening here. So let's go fix these poses up. We come up. I could definitely see there being a little bit of overlapping action here on the forearm. So as we come around, and let's cause a little bit of drag at this point. So let's do something like this. Oh, I'm doing this still with the fixed interval edit mode enabled. That's always the one thing that gets me. Got to remember to turn that thing off when you're done. So we're going to come across, and then here, I want this arm down, and I don't like the way that rotation is pulling on the upper body. So I'm going to deselect this. There's this little point out here that I was rotating with. So I went ahead and disabled that. Probably wouldn't hurt to just lock these again, just to make sure I never accidentally pull this body. Okay, so here, for this frame, I want to get the arm kind of at like this 45. And then what we're going to do is you can kind of picture this as being the arm here and here should pretty much look the same in terms of the angle or the slope of the forearm. And when I go back, I want to keep that same angle as well. So it almost seems like it's like acting like a piston. And then here, I'm still getting some rotation. Yeah, so we could do this. If I really wanted that to kind of be like a piston action, it would be interesting to grab the keys in this area, and we could try setting that to, I haven't done this before, I just kind of want to see. So we're going to set that to a linear, and now we get a nice slide up and then back down. So let's go ahead and see what this is looking like. Okay. Yeah. So this is our run so far. Now, again, we still have some issues because we have some kind of like weird kind of wobbling in the front, and I'm trying not to be distracted by that. So I'm just going to hit spacebar to go into full frame. And I'm also trying to look, I feel like the upper arm is coming up and then it's kicking back pretty fast. So in this case, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to lock this point, take this, because I want the angle to be the same, but I want to get this a little more forward like that. And maybe even like this. I'm trying to really exaggerate how long it holds in that area before coming back. So let's see what that looks like. There we go. And again, I'm locking these points here so that when I translate this around, it doesn't actually pull the upper arm at all. Okay, so that is our left arm, and our legs are looking pretty good. What I want to do is I want to get this left arm transferred over to the right arm. Actually, I think before we get to the arm, because we do want to transfer the animations from the left arm to the right arm, I'm actually going to just take a quick stab at kind of refining the animation in here. So, we have some left to right happening, but things feel a little strange. And also from this front view, I can really tell that I feel like the forearm really kind of pops forward there. So I might even go back and refine this left arm a little bit more now that I see what it looks like from the front. So let's go ahead and just take a look at what the trajectory is for the hip here. And I want to do that for the entire time range. So let me just go ahead and do this. What I want to see is at the 0, 50%, and 100% points of the animation, the hip is centered, not at the extremes. And right now it's at the extremes. So I'm going to just grab these bones here, or these controller points, and just kind of try to move that to the center like this. And then I'll take that and I'll clone that over to the last frame there. And then here I need to do the same thing. So I'm just going to kind of pull this in. So now we get a little bit of that heart shape happening. Now there was quite a bit of motion happening in here. So I need to also kind of fix up my upper body. I'm going to unpin this. So let's get the upper body going. Well, let's hit play right now and see what this looks like. Yeah, so now we get this pretty extreme kind of wobble in here. So let's take this, and I really want to see like a C shape on this first pose where it's bending towards the leg that's planted. So let's just pull this over like so, just so it's a little left of center. Like that. I might wind up actually taking these shoulders and pulling those as well. So for now, I'll take this and clone it. Now, I'm not going to clone my center key here because I've been adjusting my right or my left arm. And if I just mirrored this frame 10 or the 50% point, I would lose those adjustments. So I'm just going to manually fix this like so. And the good thing with this too is it gives a little bit of variation into our animation. All right, so now I see that what feels like the upper body is probably too extreme, but this is the animation that we have. It looks like there's quite a bit of wobble though. So I think I'm going to take, let me lock this. I don't think I need to lock these arms, but just to be safe, I don't want to mess with the arms. I'm going to lock those. I'm going to grab all of these points. Now I'm just going to take it back a hair. Yeah, so I'm moving the pivot points of this when I do that, which I don't want. So let's grab this. I have to have something unlocked there. Just to make it a little more straight. All right, I'm curious to see what that did to my arms. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to actually, before we go any further, I'm just going to take a look at that swing again. And one way I could visualize that is I could visualize the actual rotation. So let me just unlock and make sure I lock it to this character. And I want to visualize that rotation on the Z-axis. So I'll go into my settings and I'll go into the trajectory mode, or sorry, the trajectory. And I'm going to say Z-axis for this. And I'm kind of just curious to see what the pacing is of this. Yeah, I think what I'm reacting to is the fact that on frames kind of 10, 0, and 20, the arm is kind of back. So we're getting a lot of motion happening here, but not as much here. So what I want to do to fix that is let me make sure nothing is locked to begin with. So we'll hit R. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to move that forward a little bit more. Actually, this would be a good point to kind of go back to our reference. It's very possible that I may have just shifted something off with the reference. So here on frame 0, they have it a little like here. So we'll take that and let me just copy that there. And then for this middle frame, what I want to do is I just want to make sure that frame 10, this point is roughly at about the same position. And let's see if that now feels a little better in terms of the way that swing was. Yeah, now the form again is a little rough, a little stiff. Maybe I could add a little bit more to it, but I think in terms of just blocking in and getting something where we get a sense of what the run animation is, now that we have this and our core of the body isn't feeling quite so weird, a little bit of a head wobble that we might want to refine, let's go ahead and get the animation from the left arm over to the right arm. I'm now ready to mirror my animation over from the left arm to the right arm and then offset that animation. But before we do that, we need to make one small change. Right now, if I select this upper kind of clavicle control, or the control that controls the twist of the clavicle, you'll notice if we go into the show hidden behavior options and under additional info, we'll see that it's assigned to the body track. And we need to move that over to the arm track so that when we shift the animation over, it shifts over as well. So to do this, we'll simply select the point. We'll go into the controls here. We'll go to the right arm and we'll expand that. And I'm going to select the shoulder track and then I'll hit F9. Now I don't technically need to do this for the left point, but I'm going to go ahead and do it as well, just in case I, for some reason, would mirror back. So I'll hit F9 there. Now, if we select these points, you'll see that they're assigned to one of the arm tracks, in this case, the shoulder R track, which is exactly what we want. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and double click and then grab this additional point. I'm going to go to the mirror tool. And when I do my mirror, I'm going to make sure my entire interval is selected. And I'm also going to turn off that fixed interpolation on change interval. And under the mirror tool, we'll go to the X plane and I'll say mirror on interval. So now my animation should look like this. Then I simply need to shift the animation over. And to do that, I'm going to expand my timeline out. I am going to grab all these keys, the interval, and then I'll middle click and drag to shift them like so. Now I have a big gap in my keys here and this first frame is still not correct. So I need to grab this set of keys here at the end and shift, middle click and drag back to the beginning. Then I can grab these keys here and do Alt F 2 times to remove those keys. Now, I think because I had the cycle enabled, that got a little weird. So I'm going to take the entire thing and just disable the cycle. And now I could go in here and select everything and enable that cycle again. So now we have this looping animation where the arm from one side is transferred over to the other side. All right, so when we're doing a run in place animation, we obviously don't really have a good sense of what feels right or wrong about it until we know the speed at which the character is traveling. So let's go ahead and refine this animation so that we can see our character moving through space. I'm going to go to the side view. I'm going to grab all of the points. And then I'm going to go into interval edit mode. This time, though, I'm going to deal with a linear modification to the movement. And I'm going to turn on ghosts, but I'm going to turn on ghosts for every frame. And I'm also going to turn on that wireframe. This is going to make it really easy to see what is the distance my character is traveling, because I'm just going to pull out here until it looks like the feet are kind of overlapping one another with the wireframes. Now, of course, the thing here is I've just been ballparking my foot placement. So we might find, like in this case, if I look at where the character is starting at the center of the world, like here is a point where it looks like most of the feet, the wireframes are overlapping. But that very first frame is not really overlapping with the rest. So we look at the heel. So I'm going to have to do some refining to get this plan looking right. And now if I look at the right foot feels like it's kind of landing nicely, ballparkish into the right area. So I think I'm going to use this as my run cycle speed. And when I release, we get an update of the foot placement as well. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the ghosts, and I'm going to go in here and hit play and just see, hey, it actually looks like I think the tempo of this run and the poses work out well. You may find sometimes that when you do this, when you actually get it moving through space, it just looks like the character is putting in way too much effort and exerting way too much energy for the distance they're traveling. So if that's the case, you could either, lower the leg down so that the poses are not as extreme. You could try to take things closer to the jog. So maybe the leg's not going to kick up as much, or you could just also have the character move through space more until the poses themselves feel like they fit well for the actual distance being traveled. But I feel like that looks like, a casual kind of run that we have happening. So I think that works. Now we just need to go in here and we need to kind of fix up the feet themselves so that the plants actually look good. I'm going to go and I'm going to enable the ghosts again. And I'm going to just do it just for keyframes. And the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this foot isn't clipping into the ground. So I'm going to go into my feet here. And for my left leg, the first thing I could do is I could go in here and just set this to a linear blend. And I really just need to do it for this first interval here. So that's going to cause the foot to not drift so much into the ground. The other thing is I want to just correct this toe a little bit so that the tip looks like it's rolling nicely there. And then I'm coming off the ground. And this is working. If you really wanted to massage things, depending on how far you are in the animation, you might add an extra key at this point and take this and then take these points and start to, get the toe kind of coming off like this. But that level of refining, I wouldn't do at this point yet. It's still a little too early. We're just mainly trying to make sure the foot looks like it's getting planted. So we're coming around. And in this case, what we want to see is the foot coming forward. So I'm going to do the next frame coming up. So here we see a kind of discrepancy. The heel at this point is a little in front of the heel at the end frame. So I'm going to pull this back a little bit. And then I'm going to take this one and I'm going to just try a linear blend on that as well. It's almost like the foot is just hovering to plant. Now, if we go back to our reference image here for the run, I do call out that around the 90% point, we have the foot planted and we haven't actually created that pose yet. So that 90% would be for the halfway point. So in our case, we're just talking about the last half of this cycle here. So 10 to 20. And so 90% of the way would be right here on frame 19. So I am going to actually add an extra key at this point to make the plant feel nice and solid. And I could, even at this point, I could just take and copy that key over from 20 to 19 so that the frame hits one frame earlier, like so. Now, if I also wanted to, I could, maybe at this point, just give the body a little bit more height. So I could go in here and I'm kind of going off script here, but let's just set a key for everything. And then let's just take the character and just give him just the most subtle upward motion. And I want to not select that knee here. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm not going to do the legs, and I'm just going to go up a little bit. So he's coming, and then we're going to feel that kind of compression or that weight coming in to the impact. Now, in this case, I would want that same thing on frame 9, and I don't have that, but I don't want to do the mirror yet until I get the leg copied over from the left leg over to the right. Then once I know both legs are correct, then I could go ahead and copy 19 over to 9 and just do the mirror, and everything should work out nicely. Another thing is this animation cycle is currently not set to a cycle with translation offset, so things are not looping smoothly, but that's okay because we're not actually trying to see this character moving through space yet. More than one cycle. Okay, so let's go ahead and in the next video, we will copy the leg over using the same technique we did for the upper arm. All right, so we're now at a point where we're ready to try to do the same thing we did with the right arm, but do it to the right leg. So we want to mirror and offset the animation. I'm going to go ahead and make sure my entire interval is selected, and I'll grab all of these points down here, and I'm going to go to the X plane, make sure fixed is off, and then I'm going to say mirror interval. This looks good initially, so this is our animation. Now, what's different about this time versus the last time is that my character is now moving through space. So we're not going to be able to just move these keys over. Like if I go in here and I select my right keys and I just middle click and drag those are IK keys. And so the points actually try to go back to where they were in space, into the world space, because they're IK keys. Now, I could go in here and I could say make those FK keys, and you would think this is going to work because we're going to have the rotation data is really what we want. Now, when I hit that FK key, it only actually did it for the last key. So if I want to do it to the entire interval, we need to make sure we switch over to interval here. And then we're going to hit FK. But this is also not going to really work the way we want either. So if I middle click and drag this over, and let's see how noticeable it is from the front. Yeah, so what's happening here is it's getting the animation and kind of playing it in relation to the orientation of the hip. So now you'll see like this leg, the hip doesn't have a lot of rotation back and forth, but it has enough that you can notice this leg is kind of swinging in. So that's also not going to do what we need. What we actually need to do is we need to copy this animation and paste it, but relative to this point up here. And we want that relative copy or paste action to happen in the relative global space. So if we choose global relative, it's just going to say this animation data related to the point in space up here, but it's just the positional information. It's going to ignore any orientational information. And that's what we need to do in this case. So I'm going to select all of these keys. I'm going to select those points, and I will right click on here, make sure I have global relative enabled, and then I'm going to go to the edit menu, say copy interval. Now I'm going to go down below, and I'm just going to go out my timeline. It can go beyond frame. I think we need to go like frame 31. We can go beyond that. It doesn't really matter. Now I'll go to the edit menu, and then I'll say paste interval. So now I have this animation happening through space, and the animation was pasted relative to where that top of the leg was as it moved through space. I need to then do the same thing for this animation data here. So I'm going to select all of this, and I'll say edit. I'll copy the interval, and then I'll come down here and I'll paste this. Now, I technically didn't need to grab the very last key because we already have that on frame 10, but that's what I did. I'll go to edit, and I'll say paste interval there. And there we go. Now, if you go into the edit menu, you will notice above that there's like a paste into interval. Don't do that one. That's literally taking a single pose and pasting it through the interval you have selected. We want to paste the entire interval animation. All right, and then just like before, we can go ahead and get rid of those keys. So that is a technique for getting a cycle kind of pasted through space. All right, so now my character is moving through space here. I'm going to look from the front view and hit play and just see how things are looking. Let me just shrink my animation. And also, I want to kind of test this with cycle interpolation. So I'm going to select all of these keys, and I'll say translation only. I don't want any like rotational offset that I might accidentally have in my character. So there we go. That's my animation so far. I'm going to select the root of the character here, just that hip, and I just want to see what the trajectory is looking like here. Okay. So there we go. At this point, you could go in if you wanted, and you could start to refine the animations, grab any of these points that we have. For example, if I look at this animation right now, I think there's kind of some kind of strange wobble possibly happening in this area that I might want to touch up. So going in there with the trajectory tool and seeing what the motion is happening there, or really taking advantage of the ability to see the trajectory in terms of rotation. So if I grab this, and if I zoom out here, it's a pretty long track there because I'm moving through space. So I'm going to go into my trajectory options, and I'm going to say I want to see this as a local rotation information. So even though he's moving through space, I get to see the kind of back and forth that's happening here. And I can look for any kind of weird nuances that I see in here where I'm not getting like a nice clean cycle. It looks like it's coming across and then dipping in and out again. So I could adjust some keys there, just smoothing out any of my motions. Once you've smoothed your motions out, you have a couple choices of how you could go about finishing this animation off. So this would be a great time to apply physics because our character is moving through space, which is what we want with the physics system. Also, maybe you want to actually view this animation in place, but you would like to keep it through moving through space. Just so everyone's aware, what you can do, I will select my center of mass here and then just lock my camera to that point. So now the only thing I'm really not able to view in this is I'm not able to see the up and down of the character, but it gives me a nice reference point so I can really see how cleanly the cycle is or isn't happening and do cleanup there. Now, if you do want to get your character moving back so they're in place and you want a quick way to do this, you have a couple options here. So the most obvious option we have is we could just go in there with our character. We could select all these keys here, right? And we could just, maybe with ghosts enabled, and we'll do this for kind of everything. We could just pull our character back, make sure obviously you have everything selected, or even better yet, just grab that center of mass and we can move that back like so. The one thing though is that this is a little bit of, guessing how far we need to go back and spending a lot of time noodling with the position, which I don't necessarily want to have to do every time. So I'm going to show everyone an alternative option that we have here. What we can do, let me go ahead and just turn these ghosts off here, is what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a locator in my scene. So I'll go to Commands, Add, and I'll say Locator. I will disable the interval edit mode just to make sure I'm not doing anything stupid. So I've got this point in my scene. I'm going to go ahead and just add it as a new track here. And I just want that to not be part of the character. And I'll get rid of all these keys because I don't need keys on this guy. And I'm going to use it as a frame of reference to where the character ends their animation. So I'll select my hip here on frame 20. And I'll just make sure in the copy mode, I don't have relative enabled. Local and global are both collected during the copy operation. So these really only matter during the paste. At least that's my understanding. But I still tend to switch these over to what my intended paste operation is going to be, just so I don't forget. And obviously the tilde key is going to do that for us as well. So I will copy this position in space for my hip. Notice I'm using the hip and not the center of mass, because if I do any more refinement of the limbs or anything, then my center of mass could shift, but I know my hip should land here. And then I'll just go back to frame 0. I'll select my locator here and I'll just paste that in. So I can use this to get my character back here, and I'll show you guys how to do that in a moment. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and just lock my track so I don't mess with anything. Okay. Now I want to get my character running in place again. So what we'll do is I am going to double click, and actually I need to do this on frame 0. I'll jump to frame 0. I'll hit copy. I'll go to the full interval and just enable interval edit mode linear, and I will paste. So now my character's back in place. And then let's say I decide I want him moving through space again. Really easy to do. We'll do the same copy operation, but enable relative this time, and I'll hit copy. And then I'll just right click on my little locator and I'll paste. And now my character is moving through space again. So super easy to go back and forth between moving through space and running in place with that little technique. All right, so that wraps up this video series about how to create a run cycle in Cascadeur. Hopefully you found it useful and discovered some new tips and techniques.